You are listening to Co-Create Your Life. In this podcast, we delve deep into the law of attraction, dispel common misconceptions, and give our listeners the tools they need to build a magical, purposeful existence in their everyday lives. Reclaim the creative power you already possess and join us at cocreationcoaching.org/create. That's cocreationcoaching.org/create.
Welcome to Co-Create Your Life. This is episode 38, Light Language and the Law of Attraction. I am Brandon Oliveris.
And I'm Christine Oliveris.
And today we have a very special guest that I'll be introducing in just a second that will be talking about light language, which I've been emphasizing a little bit more over the last few months. We've been looking forward to this over the last 3 months or so we're super excited about this podcast. But first, just an announcement. If you would like to see the show notes for this podcast, you can go to cocreationcoaching.org/create038. And if you would like to ask a question for a future podcast for us to cover, you can go to cocreationcoaching.org/ask. So today, we are excited to be interviewing Jamye Price. Jamye Price, author of Open to Light Language, is an international energy healer, channel, and teacher. She has developed a healing modality, crystalline soul healing, a powerful alchemical template of soul progression. In addition, Jamye channels healing energies in the form of light language, which are transformational creation codes that further align you with your soul. She teaches both of these modalities worldwide. Jamye also channels Arion of the Lyran Council of Time. These loving Lyran messages are focused on humanity's ascension and connecting you with your timeless nature as humanity moves into fourth and fifth dimensional expression. Jamye offers profound private sessions by phone or Skype. She facilitates unique and transformative teleclasses and Arion channelings monthly. She creates powerful light language healing CDs, as well as a free newsletter and weekly light blasts to help assist light workers on their divine path. For more information, visit jamyeprice.com. That's JAMYEPRICE.com. So, Jamye, we're so excited, like I said, to be interviewing you today. Christine first read your book, last year, was it?
February, I did.
Oh, was it this year in February?
Yeah.
So Christine's really, really been the one into light language. I've been sort of a little behind the times somewhat. I'm getting there. But you were the first one came to mind when we thought about introducing this topic to our audience. So we really appreciate you talking to us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So just to start out, I've talked a bit about light language to our audience, but I think it'll be good to get another perspective on it. So could you tell us a bit about what is light language to you? How would you define it?
Good. So light language is something that ultimately is very natural to us. In essence, it is just a form of nonlinear communication. We learn to communicate by memorizing words and then developing context. And when you're communicating with light language, you are connecting with more of a universal, nonlinear flow of information. So some of its benefits are it helps us bypass the linear thinking in our mental constructs and connect more with our heart. So it's really opening up at a fast pace in this time because we are going through a process of ascension or just a very natural evolution into more focus and conscious connection with the subtle realm, something that's always been there and we've always been interacting with, but now we're becoming more conscious with that. And light language is a wonderful bridge for that because it is a form of connection or communication that helps us use more of our nonlinear beingness, and so that we're starting to interact with vaster amounts of information rather than things that are so linear and contextual. So it's a really exciting point in our progress, and it's been really nice to see how quickly it's been opening up over these past few years.
Yeah, it really has. I know Christine's been studying light language.
Well, go ahead.
No, for quite a while. Light language in this terminology for since last year or 2 years
Yes,
ago.
because before I only knew, because I grew up as a charismatic Christian. So as you would know, would be speaking in tongues or praying in tongues. Now, when I grew up, I noticed that there were people that it was genuine, and there were people that kind of faked it, like they weren't connecting with the energy. And I could always tell, and I'm like, there must be something more to this than just what the Bible says. So I've been on a mission to figure it out for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
It's an interesting one because it's something that it's such an indicator for where we're at on so many levels in our journey. And you just brought up a perfect one, Christine, which is our personal discernment. Because, we're seeing this in so many different ways, like with fake news and, things like that. But what it's really all about is we're stepping out of less control by outside authority and more internal discernment.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean there's no facts anymore, but it's just a different flow where it's much more important for us to have our unique and concrete communication with the subtle realm, which is things that aren't necessarily provable. So, for instance, looking at two different people that are doing light language or speaking in tongues, and one is authentic and one is not, it really takes that personal discernment, because on the outside, they both sound like gibberish, and someone could say, oh, but they were saying this, I understood it. They were talking about shoes, and it will always come back to your personal discernment. So it's another layer of why light language is opening up so much right now, because we're on a really interesting aspect of our evolution where we're becoming much more in tuned and responsible for our inner experience.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that even happens, when people are speaking English or any language, because I think as we become more discerning and intuitive, we can tell when someone's speaking from, say, personal experience or personal inspiration versus when someone's just saying something they've heard themselves but not really experienced. And so I think that applies with any kind of communication, definitely in light language, but any kind of communication I think works like that also. Yeah.
It's just now we're going to have to rely on more of that personal discernment more and more. It's fascinating. The internet really opens up a whole new a whole new era of us having to use our personal discernment. It's really actually exciting, but it's not always easy in those transitions.
Yeah, it's not. So why don't you tell us a little bit? It was fascinating in your book about how you really got into all this, and it seemed to be more of almost a calling, I would say. I don't know if you put it that way, but just with your reluctance to get into all of this. So I can really relate to some of that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you really got into using light language?
Yeah, it was definitely something that I was reticent to open up to, because I had some preconceived notions that I wasn't going to be able to live a normal life. It was all or nothing. And most of that was because I was resisting the opening so much that it was kind of a physical thing for me. If I would go to some place where there was, a lot of energetics there, like a channeling or meditation class or something, my body would react and light language would want to come out. And it was because I was resisting. So I assumed that I was just going to become some kind of weird, really weird person. And luckily, I am weird, and it's becoming the new normal. So
Embrace
it's all good.
I love it.
And really what it took for me was a growing of my courage to what I thought was a fear of other people not accepting me. But what I found was, sure, there's some of that, but really the core of it was me accepting myself. And once I did that, and once I didn't resist the flow and these things that I loved, but I was kind of afraid of how they were going to affect my life, once I stopped resisting that, it really flowed easily, and there was no more challenge with it. Now, definitely, I still have challenges with it. You know, people will leave mean comments or write me mean emails or whatever, but it is so minor in comparison to the benefit that I feel from just allowing this to be, and the feedback from others that are like, wow, thank you, this was happening, or I felt something, and, you know, I don't know what it is, but it feels good to know that something's expanding me. What the minor part of the challenge is so worth it. And even that, I'm kind of like, ooh, yes, thanks for the exercise of making sure that I feel so strongly about honoring who I am and this amazing connection with something that feels so sacred that I'm never going to stop sharing it.
That's awesome. That's really amazing.
That is really amazing.
I know, I mean, it always came easily to Christine, I think. For me, it was much greater challenge because I had such a negative experience with it in, you know, the Christian religion, with like in the Pentecostal church when I was like 16, and people kind of surrounding me and almost forcing me to try to speak in tongues, and feeling like a failure for not being able to at that time. And then, you know, I did, when I met Christine, she told me about it, and I sort of reluctantly got there to the point where I did start, and I was still Christian at the time, but for me, what it was over time was the skepticism. I have such a cynical, sort of skeptical mind where I'm thinking, I'm just saying gibberish. I mean, sometimes I'm saying the same set of syllables. It sounds ridiculous, you know? And so my mind's saying, no, this is not real. There's no way. And so I've gone off and on with it. Even as light language, it is a huge challenge because it really sometimes feels like when you're saying it, when you're speaking it, this is nothing. I'm just speaking gibberish or something. Did you have trouble with that?
Yes, you know, I think in the early days, if I hadn't had some synchronistic events of meeting people, that I just don't know if I would have been able to sustain the positiveness with it.
Yeah.
So it's something that definitely takes some nurturing, and that's one of the things that I love about teaching it, because when it started happening to me and for so many others, the environment didn't feel nurturing, and not even necessarily because it was the opposite of nurturing, but because it's such a personal and scary thing, you know, to utter things and then feel like people are looking at you and judging you or expecting something. So it's definitely something that it nurtures your courage. It nurtures your inner resolve and your inner connection. And there are times where, even today, you know, after over a decade of doing this publicly, not to mention all the time that was private, it took me a long time to get public.
Yeah.
But nurturing that, there are definitely times still where it's flowing and I'm not getting any kind of interpretation or informational connection with it. And we use those to help us develop trust that something is happening. But it can never just be the defining factor, because there's a lot of times that energy is transmitting that just isn't definable in our linear translation. So it's really helpful, and I go through this in the book too, to start looking at how am I feeling? Is there anything that I'm noticing that is different than just gibberish? Because we can do gibberish, we can just make sounds and there's nothing more to it. When you get used to looking for those clues within yourself, like a physical sensation, like maybe your heart starts to beat faster, or you feel energized, or like your eyes get brighter, so the crown chakra starts tingling. So you look for some of those things to help give yourself evidence, and always keeping that little bit of skepticism that's like, okay, well, I noticed that, but whatever. I'm just going to keep noticing things and see what happens. And then as you start sharing with others, you'll get some of those weird validations that you're like, whoa, something did happen then, because I was feeling something in my knee and that person said they felt something in their knee. Still, I'm going to keep a little skepticism and just be like, well, guess something was happening in the knee. So you have to kind of build that evidence for yourself and that trust in your flow. So even the class itself is about going through all of these different layers of building that trust that you get to communicate with the universe. And it's something that builds over time. Even in my own experience, it builds over time. So it's good, though, to keep a little bit of that skepticism, because what it means is you have a deep desire for it to be authentic. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having that inner dialogue with yourself.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
That's a good point. Yeah, for me, I definitely have different sensations when I do it. I feel kind of more expansive, and I feel like energy. I'm very attuned to energy, so I feel energy flowing through my body. But one little experiment I did personally, because I do healing, like energetic healing for Christine all the time. And so I would start just kind of I think it was after she started reading your book, and I would sometimes, because she would read it on Kindle and have her phone speak it out loud with voiceover.
Because we both are visually impaired.
Yeah.
So.
And so she'd be listening to that, and I would kind of be doing my thing, but I'd kind of sometimes stop and listen, like, oh, that's interesting, I like how that was written. and she'd be like, are you interested? I'm like, nah.
And then I turned it up a little louder.
Yeah, I'm not interested.
Yeah, exactly.
But so what I started doing when I would do healing for Christine, I started, well, let's just do a little bit quietly in my mind. And she's like, oh, I noticed something different there. I'm like, that's weird.
And you wouldn't tell me.
I don't know why. And so then I would I would kind of try to randomize it. Some days I wouldn't do it and just do energy healing, and some days I would include the light language just in my mind. And I would say like 99% of the time, she would comment there was something different about it. Like,
I could see the symbols. It was weird.
For a long time, even before I started, she would see the symbols, or sometimes you would hear, she'd like, did you say something? Like, no, I really didn't say anything. Well, I heard like this whispering. That's weird.
Awesome.
And
excellent.
I'm very, because the way I like energy healing is physical touch, because when you can't see, I don't like people hovering over me. It's really disconcerting. So that's really when I would notice it. And I'm like, I hear something in his energy field. What the heck is going on? Yeah. So I knew what he was doing.
Yeah. So that
was great confirmation with the non-linearity of it.
Exactly.
Hearing something that's not audible, yet it's being heard, or seeing something that's being spoken inside your mind. That is awesome.
Yeah,
it was really fascinating. So that was kind of what helped me to sort of come on board and say, okay, well, maybe there's something to this. So did you have, was there one experience that you could point to and say, this is the time I knew for a fact that something was going on?
When the way that my opening happened, it was very gradual over a long period of time, even just meaning my psychic opening. So there was a long time where things were happening psychically, and it took me a while to recognize them, like hearing my guides in my head. I used to zone out and go kind of unconscious. And then when I would kind of come back aware, I would just be like, wow, that is so weird. Why am I thinking about the healing properties of color green? And I had no context for that whatsoever. I didn't know about chakras. I didn't know about healing colors. I didn't know about energy healing. So that was a long process in itself. Then when I finally realized, and I was seeing things psychically and I was hearing things, once I realized that, I had such a trust in that process. And I don't still to this day, in fact, even less to this day, but my guides have never been that in the way that they're going to be like, do this, do that, because I'm on an empowerment path. And so it's not about the information, it's about the learning. So by the time that the light language started happening, it came through my hands. And so I would have a client on the table, their eyes would be closed, and I was very accustomed to having a conversation with my guides and being shown where to put my hands, how to move them, or to move to another location. So I already had a trust by that point. And then later, when the sound wanted to start coming out, and I was really resistant to that, that's where I started coming across people. I had my soul sister that also channels light language like I do, and then I met someone that writes light language, and I would interpret for him. So at that point in time was where it really became more tangible for me that I had the courage to move past my fears. But the trust in what was occurring was always there, just because of how I had opened up. And I came across different stories of people that had opened up and shut back down because it was so freaky for them. And I get it. But because mine had been gradual, and it had come in this context of such loving support and healing, that I was very open to the natural communication that I was having. So my doubt was more about, how are people going to judge me? It never was about the light language itself, just because of the way that it opened. And I think there's a perfection to either way, or any of the ways that it's going to open for each person, because the layer of trust and skepticism, that is a balance that we should always have, because we are dealing with unknowns and discovering through the human form. So the trust that I had in the light language was the perfect counterpoint to the fear that I had about the judgment for it from the external. And that flow from inside really fueled me through that courage to move past the fear. Just in the same way that the skepticism with your own internal connection can be reinforced by those around you. Exactly like the story that you and Christine have of sensing when something was happening.
Yeah.
Even those are such a beautiful opener for us to discover what we're capable of. And so I love that juxtaposition.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Yeah.
It definitely got, I need a lot of proof. Like, for me, it needs to be overwhelming proof or evidence for me to say, okay, I get it, and even then sometimes, I mean, like I do, my thing is the law of attraction, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but for me with the law of attraction, even it took me a good year to really come to terms with, okay, this really does exist. Because for a long time I thought I think it does, maybe it does, but then maybe not. Like, who am I to think that if I think a different way, that different things will happen in my life? Like, so in general, any spiritual concept I take on board, I go through this really lengthy period of growth where I'm kind of needing more evidence, and the universe is showing me the evidence. I'm saying, I don't know, let's say a little bit more, and eventually I do get it, and then I do believe in it. But that's just kind of how my mind works.
And Jamie, I kind of understand. Go ahead.
Well, and I think that's a good thing to have, because it helps you build the empirical evidence.
Yeah.
Because you're not just going, well, I don't believe it, so it doesn't exist. You're really searching, and that's a positive thing.
Right, yeah. I definitely do. What were you going to say, Christine?
And I was going to say, and I'm like you, where it was very loving. Like, light language was a very loving thing for me growing up. And because I have glaucoma in both eyes and I've had a lot of problems, people would lay hands on me and speak it, and, obviously in the Christian tradition. But for me, it was always such a loving, healing experience. It was very natural, just like it was for you. And so for me, I connect it with healing a lot. Mm-hmm. So I I understand you.
Yep. Yeah, it's such a beautiful and profound connection, even though it's not the only way of healing. But there's something about that communication flowing through.
Yeah.
I get the question a lot sometimes, or not a lot, but I get the question sometimes, well, why does it have to happen like that? Why can't it just be silent, or why can't it just be toning? And a big part of it is because it's connecting to the way that we communicate. It's allowing information and language to flow through, where our senses get to connect in a very deep way.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's a beautiful expression. And then when it's happening, when you're flowing it, whoa, it is such a cool connection. I channel in English, my known language, and I channel light language. And they're both special experiences. And we are all channels. We are actually channeling all the time. It's just a matter of...
I agree. Yeah.
What does it look like in that moment? But the difference between light language channeling and English channeling for me is, in the English channel, because they're using words that I know, I'm observing as all of that's happening, but I can't use my brain too much, because if I start thinking about what they're saying while I'm channeling, I pull the channel off.
Yeah.
And they can't speak. So I have to focus on not paying attention. And when I channel light language, I'm getting all of this data and information flow, even if some of it is very broad in nature, but it's like a wide open connection to information. And it's really exciting, such a blissful and fun experience.
Yeah, I think it can, for me, Christine and I have done it for each other a lot, and I think it can open up new downloads, new information that may have been latent, or that you may have been looking for, or just... I've experienced that. Like, I'll ask Christine, can you do a transmission for this, intention or whatever, and she'll do that, and maybe the next day or a couple of days later, like, something will happen that will validate that, or that will give me more the information I need on that, or something like that. So it's fascinating how that works.
He's asking me to do it all the time, almost every day.
Yeah, it is again, why it's opening up more now is it is part of us expanding into potentials that have always been there. They're just opening up more now, and we're starting to recognize, wow, I have access to so much. Yeah. I don't just have to go to the library and get the encyclopedia that has that, starts with that letter, which now is, oh, I don't just have to Google it, that we have access. And sure, we could still Google some things, but it's so exciting to know that there's wisdom already built into this biomechanism.
Yeah, and I think it can sort of bypass resistance in a sense, because I know I've been playing with this for a couple of years, where I have an article that's really old on my blog called The Universal Search Engine. I think it's about 2 years ago I wrote this, but I have really concrete examples of me asking the universe a question. Like, it could be anything. It could be, how do I do this? It could be, what's the best way for me to go about doing this thing? And then I just sort of let go and enter a receiving state. And then maybe a couple minutes, couple hours, couple days later, I won't even be thinking about it, and just falls into place. But the thing is that I can't have resistance about it. I can't be worried. I wonder when it's going to come. I wonder what's going to happen. Then I'm blocking it. But I think that and I'm still sort of playing with this. I'm just curious of your perspective on this, but when I'm using light language, or when Christine's using it on my behalf for intention, it sort of bypasses that, because I'm not thinking about the actual question. I'm just letting the energy come through. And it's sort of more powerful in that sense. It can open up to more possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's its core mission for us right now, is that it helps us bypass those mental constructs and the mental limitations, so that we recognize we have so much more mental capacity. And when you're hearing something, though it could be written, it could be inaudible, like you've experimented with, could sign through the body. But when you're hearing, for example, that answer in light language, the information is coming through, but your logical mind doesn't yet understand it. So you can't have the resistance. Whereas if I was saying, well, if you wanted to do that, first you need to so and so, your mind would be going, well, but why is that first? And, what about the... So it helps all of the information come in, and then you align with it, and you just start living it. That's one of the things that I love about the light language, is it helps our wisdom unfold from within. Then rather it being something like, say someone gets a session with me, rather than it being something that they're like, oh, well, Jamie told me to, or Jamie told me about, it's their wisdom that comes
I love that.
through.
Yeah.
And this is indicative of these times where it's no longer about the guru or the savior outside of ourselves. It's within us. Yeah. And sure, we share things, we co-create, and some people focus in one direction, and you need help in this direction to balance in a certain time frame. But it's just getting you back to the wisdom that's innate.
I love that, because one of my things, I'm a big mindfulness person. And I believe when the mind chatters out of the way, our innate wisdom comes up to the surface. But that's a big if, or I guess when. Like when I tell clients, just quiet your mind, just sit and be mindful. And they're like, yeah, easier said than done. And I know, because I've had the same thing. It's hard when you're really, like, right now I'm in a job transition, so there's a lot of anxiety, and it's really hard to let go and be quiet. But when you can let the wisdom come through, everything just, I call it the transformative presence, because in my experience, the more you're in that presence, the more it just perfects, it just touches and heals and fixes everything that it comes in contact with. But we're not used to getting in that place. And so it's sort of, it's nice to have a catalyst, or a means by which to get into that place where we can sort of bypass the logical mind and, the resistance and the chatter, and just sink into that presence through some other method. And I think that's one way it can really help.
Yes. Some people are easy meditators, and some people are active meditators. And so it's easier for them to get into that state when they're doing something.
Yeah.
And Zen gardens are an example of that, where that act of just the slow movement helps to disconnect the thinking mind.
Yeah.
And I find that for myself. I'm more of an active meditator. So I'd rather take a walk or do something than just sitting quietly most of the time. And light language is like that. It's like an active meditation. It's like an active releasing of the conscious focus.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to be either speaking or thinking light language and also simultaneously be thinking, what if this doesn't happen? What if that goes wrong? Like, you can't really hold both. Number one, because you can only have one thought at a time. And number two, because light language is such a higher transcendent energy than that deep dark resistance that's, has you in a bind. Like, you can't hold both at once. You're going to have either one or the other. And so when you start going into the light language, then automatically the other stuff lets go because you don't have any choice. You can't do both.
Yeah. It elevates your frequency very quickly and helps bring you into an alpha and theta state.
Yeah. And I was going to ask about, I guess we can kind of leading into this naturally, but how this can help with the law of attraction. And I'll preamble this with a story, because I was doing over the last couple of months, we missed out on this month, just it's been really hectic, but during the full moon, I like to take advantage of the full moon energies. And I've been recording a guided meditation, and then Christine and I would do a light language transmission as kind of the core part of that meditation. And I was talk about fearing judgment. I was so freaked out about that. Like, what are people, they're going to think I'm going off the deep end. And, but, thankfully I got no weird, no complaints. Like, what are you into now? But I got a couple comments. First of all, I noticed that I get a lot of repeat signups for those meditations, a lot of repeat downloads. So the same people who got the first one, they must have liked it because I get the second and third one. But secondly, I got some comments, and I remember one person in particular, and I don't remember the exact issue, but she said, literally right after I listened to this meditation, she said things changed. I got a phone call or something, someone told me I got the exact thing I needed for what my intention was. And she said,
a job, I think, in
it was, and she specifically said, and I think she called it chanting. She said, I think it was the chanting thing that you did. So it shifted for her right away.
And she listened again, I think.
And I've been toying with the concept. I haven't gotten up the courage yet, and Christine's been prodding me, but toying with the idea of, because I do coaching, and with coaching clients, of maybe recording a transmission for an intention of whatever they're working on, and seeing if that shifts things. That's something I'm wanting to go into, and I haven't yet. But it really seems to make a difference, because it helps, like I said, like you said also, that it helps to release that resistance. So my question is, I don't know how much you know about the law of attraction specifically, but how do you think it helps with when you have intention in life or desire in life and you're resistant about it? Especially, that's what I get a lot of times with people. How do you think this can help?
Well, that resistance is the core of it, what it helps us to, how it helps so much with the law of attraction, because the biggest part of the law of attraction is our resistance to the things that we want. Because there's some aspect of us unconsciously that is out of sync with something. Otherwise, even if it wasn't here yet, we'd still be like, oh, all is well. It will manifest in the perfect time. Mm-hmm. So the light language helps release that mental resistance, and it helps release those fears that are connected, like, what if I don't get what I want? What if this is hard? All the things that are conscious or unconscious that are disrupting our alignment with that flow. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is it helps to release that mental resistance. It helps to heal some of those old emotional wounds that have built up evidence that we don't deserve it or won't get it, or all of those things that we hold. It's a very natural healer, light language is.
It is.
And it's a very natural opener. You become much more soothed because you're in that state of a deeper connection with life and really feeling more of that perfection of the things around you, even through emotional ups and downs. I noticed at a certain point, because I spent so many years ago, and I still do my personal healing work. It's, when you're alive, there's progress available.
Yep.
But I spent so many years doing my spiritual work, but still so miserable. I hadn't gotten to that point where I was consistently feeling the benefit of it, but just driven to keep moving through it. And I remember the difference of when I finally felt more peace in my core. I could even go through the emotional ups or downs and still have that sense of detachment, that sense of, oh, I'm in pain right now, and yet also all's well. I know what's on the other side of this.
Yep.
And that took a while, but that is like the core of light language, where that moment is expanded into a connection that is natural to us, but it's beyond just the human focus. So it's a blending of that physical human and the divine human that we are.
Yeah.
It's a blending of the physical and the subtle. And that helps us open up to the core of the subtle realm, which is attraction or resonance. It changes our resonance. It's a really great tool for it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think I've been studying the law of attraction for the last about 3 years. And over time, I've realized more and more and more that all of the work is not on our end. Our job is simply, we decide on what we want to move towards and decide that, and then we just allow. And that's the hard part. And we kind of have this inherent kind of counterintuitive, instinct to try to work hard, to try to fit things in place and do what we have to do. And it's this egoic sort of thing that the more I do, the more I'm getting done. And I'm big into like the Tao Te Ching, if you're familiar with, by Lao Tzu. And one of the lines in that is something, I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect of, the less we do, the less is left undone. And if we do nothing, then nothing's left undone. And so that's the allowing part. I think that's so powerful. And I think light language can really help with just getting into that place of allowing and quieting the egoic voice that's saying, no, I have to do this. I have to go over here and do these things and then go over there and, busy. Whereas light language just helps us to sort of let go of that. And then inspiration will come through, and we know, if we have to take actions, that comes up, and we have to, whatever we do have to do it's natural, but it doesn't feel like all this effort.
Yes. How I've been explaining that lately is it's less about figuring out and more about discovering.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what you just explained, which is rather than like, oh, I got to do this. What if I don't do this? I got to figure out how I'm supposed to do it. If I miss that opportunity, it's gone. It's less about that and more about, oh, what if I do this?
Yeah.
Now I've got this inspiration. I'm going to try that. Oh, yeah, no, that didn't end up in that result, but wow, that was great.
Yeah.
Then, the next one is, oh, I'll do that. And it's leading there, it's discovering. And that's where we get into that co-creation And this is the thing that's so tricky about the physical realm and our five senses that are so loud that make all of this seem like it's the only reality.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a physical reality, but there's so much more to it. And as we start to trust more of that, we're co-creating with life. We're co-creating with the human self and the divine self, or the human self and the higher self, the physicality and non-physicality. It's the natural co-creation. And then all of those things that you've been hearing all your life, like we're made in the image of the Creator, or we are, creativity is natural to us. You really start to see that difference when you're discovering it. Like, oh, yes, creativity is natural to me. I am a creator. I am endowed with this natural flow to change my experience. And as I do that, everything starts changing around me. And then you notice those synchronicities, which are the most exciting part of the law of attraction.
Yes.
Because you're like, I was just thinking this. And you see life rearranging to give you that answer. And you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if? What kind of things had to happen for that person to come to that area at that time, to meet me, to give me that thing that I overheard them say? Perfect.
Yeah, we could not possibly orchestrate everything, to come together in just the right way. I mean, a lot of times it's not even inspired action as much as it's sort of natural. We just happened to do something that wasn't even related and just happened to help us to discover a certain thing that helps us along our journey. But we could never have planned that, and that's why it's so fruitless to try to egoically get in there. Okay, well, step one, step two, here's what I have to do, and to get that stress about it versus just letting go and letting the steps come to you organically. And like you said, discovering them. I like that. But just letting them open up to you and naturally coming across them.
Yeah. And then it even kind of circles back to where we were earlier with this time being so much about discovering our inner authority.
Yeah.
Our inner discernment, our inner power that, wow, I am communicating with life in deep ways, and I'm creating, and my flow matters just as everyone else's flow matters.
Yep.
And that whole transition is what we're going through as a species. And it doesn't always seem pretty when, you hear things on the news or whatever of the things that are stirring up for release. And it's not easy yet across the board, but that inner authority is growing, and it is creating more authentic connection and communication.
Yeah.
And as we become more authentic beings, not even in a deceptive way, but like some of those unconscious fears that we had that were blocking us from things that we want to create. As we release those, we become more authentic, and that clarity then flows through all life. It's really beautiful.
That is. Yeah, that's awesome. This is awesome. We're so on the same wavelength. We could probably go on with like this for a couple hours, but I will wrap it up just by asking, so if someone's listening to this and saying, this sounds awesome, but how can I get into it? How can I open up to this? What would be your suggestion to them?
Well, there's lots of exercises in my book. And sometimes just hearing light language and consistently practicing with that connection is enough trigger, because we're all naturally channels.
Yeah.
And, I teach class for those that want more interactive help through that opening, but there's so many different ways, and the book is a really nice guide through some of that. So that would probably be the first recommendation.
Yeah, it was really good. And so for those listening, I will provide a link to the book. Again, it's Opening to Light Language, and I'll give a link to that in the show notes for this podcast. So it was a really good book, and it can definitely help. And there's so much more details in the book about how all this works, and a lot of scientific stuff too, and it's fascinating. It's really interesting. So I definitely suggest checking that out. So thank you so much again for joining us here. This was a wonderful conversation, and I think, like I said, we were definitely on the same wavelength.
Yes.
It's just so much fun having this conversation.
Yes, and I'm so excited even to hear the transformation through the charismatic church with it, and expanding in different directions with that. I think it's been great that they've held that connection to it, and it's all over the world through all the shamanic traditions.
It is.
Oh yeah, it's been for it predates Christianity. I've done a lot of research about it. I'm sure you have too, obviously, but now it's like it used to just be the shamans or the holy people that did it, and now it's like anybody can do it, and we could be our own shaman.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yep, been awesome. I just love to see, and even these past few years, it has grown exponentially. So it's just been really nice to see how fast we're transforming and how much it's opening more and more.
Yeah, that's great. So if you wouldn't mind doing a transmission for our audience, I think that would be amazing, just to show how this works and let people experience it for themselves.
Absolutely. So I'm going to do a transmission to help open the heart.
That's perfect.
Awesome.
Although I feel like this is even going to have a lot of impact on the third eye.
Yeah.
And what I recommend for people is notice what you're feeling, rather than trying to, what is she saying? Just notice what you're feeling, what you're sensing, and your higher self is activating the encodements for you. So I'm not doing something to you. I'm offering out this nonlinear transmission, and then your higher self decides what you'll release and what you'll activate. So take a nice, deep, and relaxing breath and see what you notice. Jan sarunashtaru mesu kuarat ail aratairut ni ia. Jan surashtaru mesu kuaratat ail ashtaira sakni hotma. Tam uramat airushtail itsu. Susam et Dan sharunasak tairut al shtaru mesekianat inem. So sharusat ua. Jan suramashtaru kat ulakaim garutet inem. Usasamo stairu satilele im darumek ua. Kanut zet usteru mesekia. Shan surameshtur nat urakailele im. Tan huranat urakairu mashtal ham. Good. Another deep and relaxing breath. Some of the things I was noticing, now of course someone's experience can be different because their higher self is activating and releasing for them, but besides the heart, which was really prevalent throughout that, I was seeing a lot of symbols around the heart and even spirals moving especially from above to below. Besides the heart and the third eye standing out quite a bit, the first chakra also stood out quite a bit. And I was feeling, especially the spirals that I was noticing, were really about empowerment and helping to ground that into the physical experience. Very cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Awesome.
That was wonderful. And we really appreciate you spending this time with us today. It was a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So again, for those listening, if you want to learn more about this, you can check out her book, Opening to Light Language. Or again, she does offer classes and sessions, all sorts of other wonderful things at jamyeprice.com. So you can go check that out there. And I'll give a link to that in the show notes. So again, thank you everyone for listening. And if you'd like to check out the show notes for this podcast, go to cocreationcoaching.org/create038. And if you would like to rate or review our podcast on iTunes, you can go to cocreationcoaching.org/create-iTunes. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And we will see you sometime soon for another episode of Co-Create Your Life. Again, I'm Brandon Oliveris.
And I'm Christine Oliveris.
And as always, anything is possible.